All right, let's get going here. The Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Transportation and Protective Security will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to examine TSA's efforts to effectively engage with the traveling public in a manner that is positive, respectful, and leads to the success of the agency's mission to secure the aviation system from threats. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. For most Americans, TSA is the most visible component of the Department of Homeland Security and the only Homeland Security component which they regularly interact with. By screening over 2 million passengers per day, TSA is constantly interacting with a diverse array of individuals, all of whom are worthy of the utmost respect, efficiency, and security. Over the course of its history, TSA has had to, at times, swiftly implement new security measures in response to changing threats. Other times, the agency has sought to gradually adjust operations to improve effectiveness and efficiency. In both cases, TSA has often struggled to communicate clearly with the traveling public. Lack of stakeholder engagement has led to confusion among travelers, airports, air carriers, and even TSA's own frontline personnel. For example, in recent months, TSA began implementing new screening procedures for passengers' accessible property at the checkpoint. This new procedure, called Enhanced Accessible Property Screening, or EAPS, was met with some confusion and frustration as travelers did not understand the reasoning behind TSA's new procedures. The reality is that the success of TSA's mission rises and falls on the agency's ability to consistently apply proven security measures across the aviation system. This cannot be done without soliciting the public's feedback, identifying and responding to the traveling public's needs, and learning how to effectively communicate with the traveling public. While TSA has, indeed, struggled in terms of communicating security information, the agency has experienced a measure of success in leveraging the power of social media to engage travelers. For example, TSA's own Instagram account has nearly 1 million followers. I wish I had that. And has been heralded by media outlets across the country for its interesting and, at times, even comical content. This account helps raise public awareness on aviation security surrounding explosives, trace detection canines, prohibited items, checkpoint processes, and TSA PreCheck. TSA's social media presence has been called one of the best in the federal government and plays an important role in communicating information to travelers. Additionally, TSA's own Ask TSA initiative has greatly improved the public's ability to quickly and easily ask questions about what items they can or cannot bring in their carry-on or checked baggage. TSA has also made improvements through its TSA Cares program, which allows passengers to call ahead and arrange for assistance at the security checkpoint in order to minimize confusion and improve the experience for passengers who may need extra help navigating checkpoint processes and procedures. These methods for improving public engagement go a long way in transforming the passenger experience into one that is less stressful and yet more secure. It is incumbent upon TSA to view the traveling public as a partner in security and leverage that partnership in a manner that is collaborative and positive. I look forward to hearing what TSA is doing to further make improvements in public engagement while protecting passengers' civil rights and liberties and respecting everyone with whom TSA personnel interact. While passenger experiences with TSA should be positive from a public service perspective, at the end of the day, effective public engagement has a direct impact on security and TSA's mission to protect transportation systems. We cannot stay ahead of evolving threats or ensure the free movement of goods and people without effectively engaging traveling Americans and keeping them aware of the importance of TSA's mission. The key drivers of this must be mutual communication, cooperation, and respect. I thank the witnesses for agreeing to appear before the subcommittee today, and I look forward to your testimony. I'm pleased to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from New Jersey, my friend, Ms. Watson-Coleman, for her opening statement.
I want to thank you, Chairman Katko, for holding today's hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today to share your expertise with us. I have the special privilege of welcoming my niece, Christine Griggs, who was called by the majority today to testify on behalf of the Transportation Security Administration. Today's topic is an important one. TSA is perhaps the most public-facing agency of the federal government, interacting with over 2 million passengers daily at more than 440 airports across the nation. TSA has a no-fail mission, as a single passenger allowed through with a weapon has the potential to cause great harm. At the same time, a single poor interaction at a checkpoint in which a passenger is disrespected, abused, or discriminated against has the potential to damage the TSA's reputation through negative media attention. Doing the right thing 2 million times every day without a single failure requires vigilance of a well-trained and dedicated workforce. TSA officers do a tremendous job under extremely difficult circumstances, and TSA leadership must continue to put them in a position to succeed. For the workforce to be able to do its job, TSA must develop procedures that are effective as both security and passenger facilitation standpoints. This is why TSA's public engagement efforts are so very critical. TSA has made significant progress in expanding those efforts in recent years. It has convened groups that represent a wide range of passenger populations and provide TSA with feedback on its programs and policies, such as the Disability and Medical Condition Coalition and the Multicultural Coalition. Many of the groups that engage with TSA, such as the National Center for Transgender Equality, provide critical perspective that can inform training that TSA provides to its officers. TSA has also expanded its social media presence, providing a mechanism for rapid response to passengers with questions or complaints about the screening process. While I commend TSA for its efforts, I believe more can and must be done. Too many passengers are still left feeling frustrated and singled out by TSA procedures. Transgender passengers are subjected to an inordinate number of alarms from technology that is unable to screen them effectively. Individuals with certain disabilities or medical conditions experience regular delays. And racial and religious minorities are left wondering whether their random selection for additional screening was truly random. As a national organization representing transgender Americans put it in a March 2017 letter to TSA, engagement that is limited to educating the public and addressing the personnel side of the screening experience fails to address the privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties issues inherent in current screening technology. My main question for TSA today is whether it can move beyond its current engagement efforts to better incorporate feedback from the public into its process for developing new procedures for and technologies. I recognize the severity of the terrorist threat TSA faces. I also recognize the need to protect specific procedures from public disclosure, which significantly hampers TSA's public engagement efforts. Continuing to improve TSA's screening operations to better account for passenger needs while facing an evolving threat landscape will not be easy, but the American public deserves nothing less. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the challenges they face, their ideas for the future, and how we can be helpful. Again, I thank the chairman for convening this hearing, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Watson-Coleman. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are grateful to have a very distinguished panel here today to testify. Let me remind the witnesses that your entire written statement will appear in the record, so there's no need to reread the whole thing if you don't want to. Our first witness, Ms. Christine Griggs, serves as the Acting Assistant Administrator for Civil Rights and Liberties, Ombudsman and Travel Engagement at the Transportation Security Administration. And the first question I have for you is, how do you fit that title on one business card? Her office is responsible for ensuring that TSA employees and the traveling public are treated in a fair and lawful manner consistent with federal laws and regulations protecting privacy. Mission-critical duties include affording redress, governing freedom of information, prohibiting discrimination and reprisal, while promoting diversity and inclusion. Ms. Griggs began working with TSA in 2002. The chair now recognizes Ms. Griggs for her opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Katko, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the TSA's approach to public engagement. As the Acting Assistant Administrator for TSA's Office of Civil Rights and Liberties, Traveler Engagement Ombudsman, I am responsible for overseeing the office charged with engaging a number of groups, as well as the general public, to ensure that various passenger constituencies are well represented in our policy deliberations. This includes the Traveler Engagement Division, which develops and implements policies and procedures regarding the DHS Traveler Redress Inquiry Program, the TSA Contact Center, and the Disability, Multicultural, and Customer Service branches, as well as the Ombudsman Division, which provides neutral, informal, and confidential problem resolution services to the public for issues, concerns, and conflicts involving TSA policies and procedures. Integral to TSA's success in carrying out our critical airport security screening function is our ability to communicate with and understand our audiences. TSA is engaged in a multifaceted approach to improve our ability to communicate with the public through a variety of forums, including one-on-one engagement with our TSOs, public forums, social media, and the internet. In fiscal year 2017, the TSA Contact Center responded to more than 601,000 inquiries by phone or email. The TCC answers questions about the checkpoint experience, addresses complaints or concerns, and serves as the intake point for travelers who need information about TSA PreCheck, DHS Traveler Redress, or their civil rights and civil liberties, among other topics. Reflective of the progress TSA is making in this effort, in fiscal year 2017, the TCC experienced a 14% decrease in the rate of complaints, despite a 3% increase in passenger throughput. While there are many reasons for this improvement, a key element of our success involves outreach. In TSA's earliest days, we reached out to community representatives to help us understand the traveling public's needs and concerns. As a result of that outreach was the establishment of TSA's Disability and Medical Condition Coalition and the TSA Multicultural Coalition. These coalitions represent a wide spectrum of travelers, including Muslims, Native Americans, persons with ostomies, mothers traveling with breast milk, transgender individuals, people who use wheelchairs, and others. One example of the positive outcome from such engagement is our work within the Sikh community, which resulted in a change in TSA screening procedures. By taking into consideration the religious sensitivities of this community, TSA now allows Sikh passengers to pat down their own religious headwear and then submit their hands for additional screening. Another example is our work to secure civil rights equities, including disability, transgender, and headwear, in the next broad agency announcement to industry to acquire improved people, process, and technology screening solutions. In late 2016, my team met with the Innovation Task Force to discuss this broad agency announcement. This coincided with our work with the transgender community and their ongoing concerns that TSA's technology systems are binary and can be problematic for transgender travelers at the security checkpoint. As a result, the broad agency announcement TSA issued in early 2017 to solicit technology ideas from industry now includes civil rights equities, which should promote improvements to screening of persons with disabilities, screening of headwear, and screening of transgender passengers. Another way TSA engages with the public is through TSA Cares, which was established in 2011 and provides a toll-free hotline that enables travelers to ask questions about screening policies, procedures, and what to expect at the security checkpoint. TSA saw an 11% call volume increase in fiscal year 2017 for TSA Cares assistance. Last year, we also began a TSA Cares video series to help better inform travelers of what to expect during the screening process. Our other key link to the public is through our social media presence, which has continued to grow. Our social media efforts aim to showcase TSA's screening efforts, canines, packing tips, and initiatives that help to increase awareness. Our Instagram account, which highlights the prohibited items, has more than 840,000 followers. We have also continued our commitment to customer service by helping passengers in real time, 365 days a year, through Ask TSA, which is our social care team that monitors Twitter and Facebook. To date, we've received more than 450,000 questions from the traveling public through Ask TSA. In closing, with the ever-increasing number of screening interactions TSA has every day, we recognize our ability to communicate effectively with all of our stakeholders is crucial. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Griggs, and I appreciate you being here today and your testimony. The next witness is Stacey Fitzmaurice. Ms. Fitzmaurice currently serves as a Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Security Operations at TSA, and is responsible for overseeing risk-based adaptive security measures at airports nationwide. She previously served as a Deputy Assistant Administrator for TSA's Office of Intelligence and Analysis and has also contributed to the mission of U.S. Customs and Border Protection as the Acting Director of New Targeting Programs within the National Targeting Center. Ms. Fitzmaurice is a graduate of the DHS Senior Executive Service Candidate Development Program, as well as Elon University. The Chair now recognizes Ms. Fitzmaurice for her opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Katko, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss how the Transportation Security Administration engages with our most important stakeholder, the traveling public, and our various efforts to keep them informed on security procedures. As the Deputy Assistant Administrator of TSA's Office of Security Operations, I am responsible for helping oversee the domestic operational arm of TSA, which secures the nation's transportation infrastructure and screens all commercial airline passengers, baggage, and cargo. OSO represents the front line of physical security screening operations, with our transportation security officers serving as our primary interface with the public. On an average day in 2017, our officers are in contact with about 2.4 million travelers at more than 440 federalized airports nationwide. With a workforce spread from Maine to the Mariana Islands, screening such a large volume of travelers and fulfilling our vital national security function while meeting the varied needs of the traveling public can be a challenge. It is our duty to keep travelers safe and secure, and it is also our duty to treat every traveler with dignity and respect. Despite these challenges, we remain focused on ensuring our TSOs are aware of the diverse need of travelers, sensitive to cultural differences, and able to effectively carry out screening requirements. To train TSOs in these screening processes, TSA established the TSA Academy in early 2016. TSA new hire training is now conducted at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, or FLETC, down in Glencoe, Georgia, a move that centralizes training for new employees, which was previously held at U.S. airports. While at FLETC, TSA student officers train at replica checkpoints involving real-world scenarios such as social engineering tactics, screening individuals with disabilities, and how to effectively implement alarm resolution procedures. This training allows the TSOs to develop a better understanding of a diverse array of passenger needs. TSOs also play a critically important role in ensuring travelers are educated about and prepared for the screening process. Last summer, as part of a continued effort to raise the baseline of aviation security, TSA implemented new security measures for carry-on baggage that require travelers to place all personal electronics larger than a cell phone in bins for X-ray screening in standard lanes. In implementing those procedural changes, TSOs designated as divestiture officers provide a critical face-to-face element and communicate the requirements to travelers at the checkpoint, answer questions from the travelers, and prepare them for the subsequent screening process. Complementing and supplementing such efforts, TSA utilized traditional media, social media, and industry partners to inform the public about the changes to better prepare travelers for the checkpoint security process. We were also able to field questions in real time through Ask TSA, receiving instant feedback from passengers and providing quick resolution to concerns resulting from the changes in security. In closing, today's threat environment is more dynamic, more profound, and more complex than ever before. As threats evolve, we must adapt to our adversaries, which necessitates changes to policies and procedures at the checkpoint. As these processes change and adapt, we must ensure that we effectively communicate to the public so that travelers know what to expect, which supports for an efficient screening experience. Additionally, we remain committed to receiving feedback from travelers and, where possible, adjusting our processes to better meet individual needs while still achieving our security objectives. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Fitzmaurice. We appreciate being here today. Our third witness is Harper Jean Tobin, Ms. Tobin serves as the Director of Policy for the National Center for Transgender Equality. She leads NCTE's advocacy with Congress and U.S. federal agencies, and also directs NCTE's policy work. Prior to her work with NCTE, Ms. Tobin worked with the Federal Rights Project of the National Senior Citizens Law Center. Ms. Tobin holds law and social work degrees from Case Western Reserve University. The Chair now recognizes Ms. Tobin for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Katko, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. NCTE has been engaging with TSA for nearly a decade now, my whole time on staff. And we see the challenges facing transgender travelers as part of a wider spectrum of concerns that affect the traveling public, including particular concerns for travelers with disabilities, racial and religious minorities, and survivors of sexual trauma. As long as TSA relies on body scanner units and intimate pat-downs as primary passenger screening tools, we believe there will be a cost to travelers' privacy, dignity, and liberty, and questions about whether that cost is paying off in real security benefits. That cost is borne by all travelers, but it tends to be greater for anyone who's perceived as being different. In 2015, NCTE conducted a survey of over nearly 28,000 transgender Americans in all 50 states. Of those who'd flown in the last year, 43% reported at least one negative TSA experience related to being transgender. These included being misgendered or harassed, being loudly questioned about their gender or body parts, sometimes in front of young family members, and being asked to remove or lift clothing to show an undergarment or sensitive area of the body. Some reported leaving the checkpoint in tears, while others feared that being outed to other travelers in the screening process could make them a target for violence. Some parents have told us they were afraid to fly with their transgender children because of the embarrassment they could face. Today's AIT can't distinguish between human body parts and a potential threat object, and instead appears to rely in part on assumptions about typical body contours of men and women. This leads to alarms caused solely by sensitive parts of the body or by undergarments. Many travelers report to us that they routinely experience alarms in the chest or groin area, necessitating pat-downs and sometimes humiliating conversations. I have to say, I personally have experienced this many times, as have many members of NCTE's staff and board and our colleagues and friends. One of NCTE's former board members, who's also a senior citizen, wrote to me just last month that she was pulled out of line at BWI because of what she was told was an anomaly in the groin area, and was patted down, or as she put it in her own words, groped by no less than 3 officers. Another colleague and friend of mine published an op-ed in 2015 about traveling to D.C. for an internship. He wrote that his excitement over the trip was quickly squelched when he was told, "Sir, we need to know what's in your pants." Now, we understand TSA's important security mission. It's important also to understand that travelers don't want to have conversations like this when they are trying to get on a plane. That was a conversation, as you can imagine, that was very uncomfortable for my colleague. Frankly, even more uncomfortable than my sitting here talking about it before a congressional subcommittee. Because we have here a government agency that has made it its business to know what's in Americans' pants. And there has got to be a way to keep Americans safe without innocent travelers being asked questions about, frankly, their genitals, or having them touched by uniformed strangers every time they try to get on a plane. Now, over the years, TSA, as I said, has worked with, NCTE has worked with TSA a great deal. We have briefed them, we've joined stakeholder calls and conferences, we've offered input on training and web content, and in 2014, I even received a Community Partner Award from then Administrator Pistole. At the same time, we've also seen the real limits of this engagement. TSA, as the chairman noted, has more contact I would add quite literally, contact with the public than just about any other agency. The staff of CRL OTE really want and try, in my experience, to improve the passenger experience. And they have done so much, as you've just heard, to engage the public on that. But in my view, they are hamstrung in that mission by the flaws of the current screening model. Their materials, while they work very hard on them and have produced videos for specific groups of travelers, different web pages for specific groups of travelers, the materials are often unable to answer basic questions because of secrecy or unpredictability, and they're often unable to respond meaningfully to complaints from individuals because the things being complained of are baked into the system. So they really try, but public outreach, has to inform policy, procedures, and technology. We understand TSA is in the process of demonstrating upgrades to AIT. When it comes to innovation, we certainly hope this will lead to improvements, but we urge the agency to think about more than making tweaks. Is continuing to invest in AIT units as primary tools really the right move for the public? Can it make more use of less invasive tools? How can the agency truly minimize false alarms and minimize its touch rate? And how can reaching out and hearing travelers' questions and concerns inform TSA's approach on the front end, not the back end? Again, I have great respect for the folks at CRL OTE and for the individual TSOs who are working very hard and often don't relish the intrusive nature of some of their work. I hope today's hearing can help ensure that TSA's public engagement leads to real improvements in the passenger experience. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Tobin. We appreciate being here today and your testimony. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. And the first question I want to talk about is the social media aspect of TSA. I think it's a very innovative thing you're doing, and you're doing a great job with it. But the question I have is, how many passenger engagements occur via social media versus traditional means of inquiry, such as an email or phone call? Does anyone have any estimate of that? It seems like there's a lot more from a social media standpoint. Ms. Briggs?
Yes, sir. Chairman, I would say that with 847,000 followers on Instagram, we have a fantastic engagement with the traveling public through that means. Through our contact center, which is our primary portal for passengers that come in with questions, we get about, I would say, about 70% or so that come in through the phone calls, and then another 30 come in with email questions. But by and large, I would say, yes, by far the internet is the greatest tool, sir.
Okay, one of the things I'm curious about is the program itself, if I'm not mistaken, has only about 10 employees right now. Is that right?
I believe that's close to 10, sir.
Okay, so that seems like an awful lot of inquiries to handle for such a small amount. Has there been any discussion had at TSA about shifting some resources to this emerging positive thing that TSA is doing?
Sure. I think there's been some discussion around some of the work that we do in the TSA Contact Center and how that could also be supportive of the ADAS TSA initiatives, and we're looking at possibly gaining some efficiencies there as well.
Okay, and I would ask that you take a look at that, and within the next 10 days, if someone could respond back to me, just letting us know what the specific plans are and what you might be doing in that regard, because this seems like a good program, and I don't want it to fall into a bureaucratic morass where people don't pay attention to it, then it suffers from it. So it's a good program, and I hope you guys will give it the amount of staffing it deserves. Now, I want to switch gears and talk to Ms. Fitzmaurice a second, if I may. The TSA PreCheck program is a innovative necessity, if you will, for risk-based security at airports. And I remember when I came to Congress a few years ago, the goal was, in a short period of time, to have up to 20 million passengers in the TSA PreCheck, because it would allow you to focus on those that are more concerned, and you can spend more time with them in the non-PreCheck environment. I know we're nowhere near that. I'm still concerned, and if we have time later, maybe we'll talk about this, why we're not where we should be with those numbers, are nowhere close yet. But one thing I have seen from the Inspector General's report from December of 2017 was that the PreCheck boom, if you will, that kind of went from 1 million up to 4 or 5 million, wherever it is now, was followed by a substantial period of delay in processing PreCheck applications. I wonder if you could talk to me about that real quick and tell me what TSA is doing to try and address that problem.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your question. And our goal is to continue to grow the program as well as the number of travelers that are receiving the pre-check based on their enrollment every day. The program did have a very significant spike in enrollments, and what I can share with you is that today we're in a very good place as it relates to the time frame it takes. It's on average less than a week if you enroll to get your response for being in pre-check. So I think the issues that we had in the past have been resolved. Additionally, that office has been able to supplement bringing on new personnel to help with the adjudication of applications.
Is there something in place to deal with potential future spikes so we don't have this happen again?
Yes, so my understanding is that they have, through the additional resources, been able to plan for additional spikes. They've also put into place relationships and engagements to be able to surge if needed.
Very good. Now, I guess sticking with pre-check, I do an awful lot of traveling, and I'm in pre-check, and it seems more and more lately that people, you hear in lines, you hear the grumblings that people don't think pre-check is worth it. I was at an airport this weekend in Miami, and I think there was probably 5 to 7 times more people in the pre-check lane than in the non-pre-check lane. And so I want you to address that as well, because it seemed like people are going through the non-pre-check lane quicker than they were the pre-check lane, number one. But number two, more importantly, we made it a big priority to get TSA to stop managed inclusion. And managed inclusion is taking people out of the regular lanes and putting them into pre-check when they don't have a pre-check background. It still seems to be the case that that happens at times and to varying degrees, and that not only is a security risk, which is probably something we need to talk about in another setting, another hearing, but it is something that people from a product standpoint think is not right, and I'm being one of them, but an awful lot of people. So from an image standpoint as well as a safety standpoint, it's not good. And we have been banging TSA over the head since I've been in Congress the last 3 years to not do this. They still do it. And I wonder if you could explain why they're doing it and why you think that's the public isn't going to get upset about it, or why do you care?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So we have ended the managed inclusion program, as you mentioned, and we also,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but are you just calling it something different now, so we have to follow that too, or what?
No, we're not doing
Okay.
that. So what I can share with you is that we have taken steps to reduce the number of individuals who would be getting pre-check that are not enrolled, and that has been subsequent or a continued drawdown over really the last year. When the program first rolled out, one of the populations that we originally targeted were high-frequent flyers. And I can tell you that that practice ended last year, so those individuals are no longer receiving pre-check just based on their frequent flyer status. Relative to your question on long lines, and I realize sometimes it can be the optics of that, what I can share with you, though, is that across the system, people who are in pre-check are waiting on average about 1.5 to 2 minutes. And over about 94% of the system for pre-check travelers are waiting under 5 minutes. So while there may be people in those lines are moving quickly.
Okay. And lastly, and I'm indulging myself because I'll give my colleagues the same courtesy. I was in an airport in Fort Myers, and they had nothing but pre-check line. And in the pre-check line, they had one dog, and people were going by that dog at a very fast pace and getting into line, and the line was backed up. They did it as a way to reduce congestion. And while it's important that we have the dog sniff on every single individual, they are still not in pre-check. They still don't have the background on these individuals. They still don't have the selectee information, if there is any. They still could be letting people through that line that maybe otherwise shouldn't be going through that line. And the whole idea behind pre-check is to know your traveler. And you don't know the travelers, you're just hoping that the dog catches a whiff of something if there's a concern. And so that, coupled with your comment that you're taking steps to reduce non-pre-check people going through pre-check lanes, is not what we want to hear. What we want to hear is that people who are not in pre-check are not going through a pre-check lane, period. That was the whole idea behind ending managed inclusion. So I feel like, in a way, that's a bit of a shell game going on, And we're going to have more hearings on this. I think we're going to have another hearing on pre-check alone to examine this in more depth. But I just want to let you know, to take back to the agency, that we are still very concerned about this. And it seems like perhaps TSA is not getting the message that pre-check means pre-check and non-pre-check means non-pre-checked. And that's it. And it shouldn't be used as a way to manage traffic. That's another issue, and we can help you with that too. But pre-check is pre-check, okay? And we want you guys to understand that. And it's something we're going to have to pursue further. I now recognize my colleague from New Jersey, Ms. Watson-Coleman, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to associate myself with your concerns with regard to pre-checked individuals being taken through the line who haven't engaged in the whole vetting process for pre-check. I guess I want to ask this question first of Ms. Tobin, and thank you all for being here. Ms. Tobin, I'm troubled by some of the discussion that you've had about the passengers that are transgender passengers in particular, that experience when they're going through screening. I get the impression that you believe that there have been some improvement in the way TSA is dealing with these issues as a result of having collaborations and feedback from you and your organization. Do you agree?
Well, Ms. Ranking Member, we certainly have seen some improvements on the human element of those interactions. We still pretty regularly hear of challenges. Some of the things I mentioned in my written testimony are things that I think fellow witnesses would agree shouldn't be happening, and those things still do happen. We have really seen improvements. We think that there's probably more that we could do if we had the chance to collaborate with their training academy, for example. But I think the major concern that we have is that there are some things that can't be addressed through the human element that are sort of baked into the current screening model. That there is no amount of professionalism on the part of TSOs, which most of the time we do see, that can make up for the fact that some passengers are having repeated alarms in sensitive areas of the body that have to be cleared in a process that is sort of inherently intrusive.
So I kind of really want to stick with this issue a little bit. I am thinking that the centralized training that takes place in Georgia now kind of provides these officers who are going to be on the front lines a bit more information and a bit more tools on how to deal with this. And so I want to get to that in a second, but I want to ask about this AIT that is gender neutral, because I believe that that's one of the things that your organization says is vitally important at these checkpoints, and that will reduce the degree to which individuals are treated in a way that intrudes upon their civil liberties and their privacy. And I'm wondering, are we really talking about AITs that are gender neutral? And if so, do you have any idea how far away we are from having them actually at these checkpoints? I guess Ms. Fitzmaurice or Ms. Griggs, I don't know which one of you wants to respond to that.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I would say that right now we are, as a result of the broad agency announcement, we have had several submissions. And through those, we are actually currently demonstrating an on-person screening solution that would eliminate any gender-specific alarms and kind of be able to make that distinction, if you will. And we're also working with vendors who have solutions for on-person screening that's gender agnostic. So I would say that right now we're in the kind of demonstration phase of it, and certainly continue to work forward to bring that as quickly as we can.
So all the vendors that you're dealing with understand that you're looking for gender-neutral technology. Do you have any idea how far away we are from seeing some of this employed in the airports?
I do not at this time.
Okay.
I do not.
That's something that I really would like to know, because I think that that's a really important issue and consideration that we need to look at in sort of an expedited way. Mr. Morris, you said the new hires are trained in the Georgia facility. What do you do about the current hirees who haven't had the benefit of this new academy to kind of bring them up to snuff so that they are operating under sort of the standard, under the standards and the rules and regulations and procedures and policies and, protocols?
Thank you. So all of our officers, whether they were trained locally at their airport and have been part of the TSA workforce for a number of years, or newer officers that have gone through the academy, have received really the same training. And so if we have new procedures or change procedures, we'll obviously implement that for the training that's occurring at the academy for our new officers. And then what we'll also do is some field-based training for our existing officers. As I mentioned in my oral statement, we have a lot of different scenarios that we train our officers on down at the academy for a variety of types of situations that they may experience and how to best to handle those situations, the best advisements to give passengers. That's one of the critical things that we find is really having that engagement and strong advisements with the passengers so that they know what to expect is really critical for us to be successful in executing those.
Thank you. I have a number of other questions, so I don't know if you want to go a second round.
We can do a second round.
Okay. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the panel. Thank you for appearing today. Ms. Griggs, I've recently become a frequent flyer due to my congressional service and as a police officer for many, many years prior to my current service to my country. I certainly recognize the struggles and frustrations of frontline officers and first responders. I've really come to know personally the men and women that serve as TSOs, especially in my local airport in Louisiana. So I've come to recognize the human element that they deal with: long lines, staff shortages, equipment that doesn't seem to be cooperating very well, et cetera. Travelers that don't quite get it on how to, arrange their bags on the screening devices. And I've seen the frustration that they face. So I'm wondering, how is morale? Can you give me a general answer? How's morale amongst your TSOs?
Thank you for your question. I would say that overall, our TSOs have a great sense of pride in what it is that they do for TSA. And I think that shows day in and day out in the work that they do to accommodate all of our passengers and to treat everybody fairly with dignity and respect. I would certainly say that those struggles do lend themselves oftentimes to having officers who get frustrated. But having spent over 12 years or so in airports and in the field, I can tell you that our leadership cadre, I think, has stepped up to the plate and really been there in terms of engaging our officers to say, if you have an issue or a concern, let's resolve it here at the lowest possible level, and let's work with our employee advisory groups, and let's hear what the concerns are and give the officers a voice, if you will, to come forward and say that this is why I'm unhappy or this is what's happening. And I think that has boded well. I think that many of them feel as though they have a voice and that our leadership has been supportive of that.
Well, that led to my next question. Thank you for that encouraging answer. Do your TSOs is there a mechanism where the TSA can hear from the boots on the ground of common sense answers to everyday problems in the lines that would make the lines more efficient and effective and reflective of the very crucial security screening that must take place, while at the same time recognizing the needs of travelers and the needs of individual Americans like Ms. Tobin is representing today, who certainly have rights that need to be addressed. Do you have a mechanism for your TSOs to regularly communicate with supervisors to address boots-on-the-ground solution to the challenges that they face?
So I think I would defer that to my colleague, Ms. Fitzmaurice. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So I think we have a variety of ways our officers can communicate. One is directly with their supervisors and routine engagements on performance and how the operation is going. Also, our federal security directors and the management staff at the airports are having routine town halls where they can solicit input. I personally have visited a number of airports and have received input from our officers on things that we take back. But we also have some systematic ways with an idea factory where officers
They
can
communicate online and submit like anonymous suggestions? and
They
things?
can. They can. It's not anonymous, but they can submit suggestions, and those are kind of crowdsourced in terms of getting feedback on them.
All
What
right,
I'll-
that's encouraging. I'd like to jump to your academy. Is there annual recertification training for your TSOs that have been through their certification training? And if so, do your existing officers that were originally trained at airports across the country, do you send them to the academy in Georgia?
Sir, we have a requirement for annual proficiency reviews for all of our officers to demonstrate that they remain proficient on all of our procedures. And, you know, for officers who have been on board and perhaps had not gone to the academy initially, we're not sending them back for the basic training, but there are opportunities for some of the advanced training for them to go to the academy for other reasons.
But training changes, and it's an ongoing process. There is some method for recertification of your current TSOs?
Yes, sir. So depending on the nature of the changes that may be implemented, we would look at different ways to deliver that training. It could be through online training. It could be through in-person training there at the airport.
All right, and quickly, Ms. Griggs, is TSA looking to expand the roles of pre-check? Is that a general goal for TSA, to expand pre-check?
I think I would defer to Ms. Fitzmaurice on that question.
Is that a general goal?
So I think we absolutely want to grow the number of
Okay,
travelers.
that being
check.
a yes, do you offer group rates?
We currently do not offer group
It might
rates.
be something to consider, because the problem that Ms. Tobin's constituency is encountering is due to advanced imaging technologies. And if it occurs to me that it could be a win for everybody, you could grow the roles of TSA by offering group rates across the country, and members of Ms. Tobin's organization could sign up for pre-check, go through their background clearance, and they wouldn't have to go through AIT, go through a metal detector through pre-check. That would essentially solve that problem. With that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for allowing me to go a little bit over my time. I yield back.
Well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I do it all the time, so I have to indulge my colleagues as well. And that was an excellent point you made. We're going to do a second round of questions. And Ms. Fitzmaurice, since you are kind of the tip of the spear with respect to risk-based the programs at TSA, I do want to go in a little further with you about the pre-check. This is an issue that's preceded your time in this position, but it is something that's troubling, because if we take a step back with pre-check, the idea of pre-check is people sign up, we do background checks, do more in-depth analysis of them, and we make a determination that if you're eligible for the pre-check program, at least in its current form, not in its original form, if you're eligible for a pre-check program, there's vetting that goes on, there's recurrent vetting that goes on, and you have an idea whether or not the individual, much better idea whether that individual could be a problem. And when you take them out of the other lanes and put them into this lane, from a risk-based issue, it's not good. And from a public relations issue, it's terrible. So you want to grow this program. And when you want to grow this program, I want to know what you're anticipating with the airports, number one, as far as the physical layout of the pre-check lanes versus a non-pre-check lanes, number one. And number two, and far more importantly, how can you justify taking people out of regular lanes and put them in pre-check when you don't have the background of them?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So we are, as I said, trying to grow the number of pre-check and draw down the individuals who are going through just pre-check that have not enrolled. That said, we also have, additional screening measures that we can apply for use of canines as an example, and we believe that that's one of the more effective screening methods. And so as we look at how to maximize the number of individuals who are screened by a canine, we've been able to redesign some of the cues to do that. Just, I guess it was last week, I was traveling out of Washington Dulles, had the opportunity to go through that. I am an enrolled pre-check member, and I found my experience to be just as efficient as it typically would be going through a dedicated pre-check lane.
But efficiency is one thing, but security is another, and they're not always mutually beneficial to each other. So I understand moving people is a priority, and I understand you have to have the constant balance between service and security. But what got you into a lot of the TSO problems in the past, as far as extraordinarily poor rating on the undercover operations, testing the security vulnerabilities at the checkpoints, there's a lot of pressure on TSOs to move people through, and it seems like that is just heightened with pre-check. Pre-check was supposed to alleviate lines by getting people in there, the only people in there that should be. We found with managed inclusion that they were usurping that. And now we're finding that it's, again, I'm not hearing from you that there's a goal to make sure that only pre-check people go through pre-check. And so at a risk of sounding redundant, I want to make sure I underscore the point that that is not the goal of the committee. The goal of the committee is to have only people in pre-check going through pre-check. And it seems like you're trying to find ways to nip around the edge of that and denigrate the amount of risk-based security you're doing. Yes, having a dog go through is great, but let's not forget, with the emerging technologies from the bad guys, they're not always going to find everything that we're looking for. So we better know with a better sense of precision who the people are that are going through pre-check, and we can only do that after they're in pre-check. So going forward, I think we're going to need to have a discussion about what to do with this issue, because it's not going to stand for us in the committee here. We simply are not going to tolerate it. And it's 3 years now down the road, and a lot of people going through pre-check still aren't involved in pre-check, and that's not good, and you cannot justify it to me otherwise. And with that, I'll yield to my colleague, Ms. Watson-Coleman.
Thank you. First of all, Mr. Chairman, I want to request to enter into the record the testimony from the National Disability Rights Guide, the Guide Dog Foundation, and the Electronic Privacy Information Center.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much. This is to TSA. There's a concern about individuals who have experienced sexual trauma or some other impediment to being able to be touched, to be patted down. How do you deal with that? What's the protocol to deal with that? How do you know?
So we have a lot of information that we put out on our website, as well as with our TSA Cares program, where individuals can reach out and let us know in advance. We have officers that are trained to support these passengers who may have some sort of need or assistance. And so our officers are trained to do that. You know, I recognize that there are times where we do need to touch individuals for our security mission. And so really what we have been focused on is being as transparent as possible with the information that we put out there, as well as I mentioned earlier, the advisements that we give. So it's really important for us to advise passengers not only in advance, but also while we're engaging with them and providing a situation so that they're comfortable. If they want to have the screening done in a private screening room, we can do that as well.
Okay. So my concern should not be a concern that someone who, you know, claims to not be touchable because of the trauma that he or she has experienced, something happens to make sure that that's legitimate and we're not just dealing with someone using that as an excuse.
Well, we wouldn't question that type of information from an individual, but if they do express that they have some concern, I think we will definitely work with them to accommodate and understand what their concerns are. No one is exempt from the screening requirement, and so, but really it's about how we work with them to accommodate them.
So I know TSA has equal employment opportunity programs and affirmative action programs or programs of that nature. I'm wondering if you have any specific program that addresses the employment of transgenders and whether or not you are employing transgenders as TSOs. And to that extent, after you answer that question, I'd like to know from Ms. Tobin, have you ever encountered any, and have they ever expressed any concerns about upward mobility opportunities? So I will leave it to either Ms. Griggs or Ms. Fitzmaurice first.
Thank you for your question. Yes, so we, to the extent that our transgender employees have informed us that they are transgender, yes, we do have transgender employees on our workforce. And to your, if you could just repeat your second question, ma'am, I forgot your second
It
question.
had to do with whether or not there are any TSOs,
Yes, there are transgender TSOs, yes, ma'am.
and if there have been sort of any impediments to their upward mobility. Because we've heard from females that there may be some impediment to upward mobility at the agency, but then I see the two of you here representing the agency. But anyway,
Yeah, so I would say that as it stands right now, we are working on a written policy as relates to our transgender employees and trying to find the right balance between obviously civil rights and liberties of the employees as well as for the traveling public. The other thing I would add is that, you know, each situation, we take it individually. And I think that the airports and the field operations, by and large, have been working very closely with any transgender employees through any transition and working with them to ensure that they're comfortable, that the workforce is comfortable, you know, in order to ensure a smoother transition.
thank you. Ms. Tobin?
We have heard in the past, we've seen cases, and in fact, TSA has had to settle EEO complaints of transgender TSOs who have faced harassment or work restrictions or other forms of discrimination. Sometimes is a matter of either of management decisions at the airport or elsewhere. That's not something that we have heard in the last few years.
Good.
And we certainly look forward to the agency clarifying its EEO policy. It lags behind much of the rest of the government in that respect, and we certainly see transgender officers in law enforcement and security positions around the country successfully. There's no, you know, special concerns for them interacting with the public as long as they can do their jobs like everyone else.
Thank you. One last general question. I know that you have two coalitions that you deal with to get feedback and that you inform of the policies and procedures. My question to you is, as you are developing these policies and procedures and considering these policies, do you seek feedback from your coalition partners in that process as opposed to at the end of it informing them so that they can therefore educate their communities?
Thank you for your question. Yes, we absolutely do. I think as part of our regular and consistent engagement with the coalitions, we do bring forward any proposed policies or changes that we are considering and absolutely allow for their input on the front end of things. And I think it's also important to inform them of the reasons why we're recommending such policies or, you know, what is the reason behind things. So we do involve them in the beginning.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your responses. I yield back.
Thank you. I would like to thank all three of you for your testimony today. It was very well done, very thoughtful, and helpful. Members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. As you know, I made a request for a response in writing within 10 days, and we'll follow up with a letter today, so you know exactly what we're looking at. And I appreciate accommodating that within the 10-day period. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing rec will be held open for 10 days, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.